All right, the news a lot of you have been waiting for. I don't know why we're rooting for negativity in the world, but Woodstock 50 is officially canceled. Word came down from organizers just a few moments ago. Woodstock 50 will not be happening at the Meriwether Post Pavilion in Maryland, and we have a statement from the organizers on why they canceled and what happened. I will read that for you now. There are some interesting tidbits to go over in that, but let me read what they had to say first. This one coming from Michael Lang, co-founder of the original Woodstock Music and Arts Festival. He says, and I quote, "We are saddened that a series of unforeseen setbacks has made it impossible to put on the festival we imagined with the great lineup we had booked and the social engagement we were anticipating. When we lost the Glen and then Vernon Downs, we looked for a way to do some good rather than just cancel. We formed a collaboration with Headcount to do a smaller event at the Meriwether Pavilion to raise funds for them to get out the vote and for certain NGOs involved in fighting climate change. We released all the talent, so any involvement on their part would be voluntary. Due to conflicting radius issues in the DC area, many acts were unable to participate and others passed for their own reasons. I would like to encourage artists and agents who have been fully paid to donate 10% of their fees to Headcount or causes of their choice in the spirit of peace. Woodstock remains committed to social change, and we will continue to be active in support of Headcount's critical mission to get out the vote before the next election. We thank the artists, fans, and partners who stood by us even in the face of adversity. My thoughts turn to Bethel and its celebration of our 50th anniversary to reinforce the values of compassion, human dignity, and the beauty of our differences embraced by Woodstock." Greg Peck, another principal of Woodstock 50, added to that in this statement, and I quote, "For the unfortunate dispute with our financial partner and the resulting legal proceedings set us off course at a critical juncture, throwing a wrench in our plans and forcing us to find an alternate venue to Watkins Glen. The timing meant we had few choices where our artists would be able to perform. We worked hard to find a way to produce a proper tribute, and some great artists came aboard over the last week to support Woodstock 50, but time simply ran short. We are greatly disappointed and thank all of our supporters, including the team at Meriwether Post Pavilion and Howard County Executive Calvin Ball. Woodstock's values of peace and tolerance are more important today than ever for all of us to stand for, and we look to the future for ways to honor and celebrate these ideals." There will be more news on this in the days to come, and I end quote there. There will be more news on this in the days to come, as this is, we're going to learn a lot of stuff, because there are a couple of tidbits that I do want to go over that were in that statement that I do find interesting. Let's start with the fact that these guys were expecting the artists to volunteer for their Meriwether Post Pavilion Woodstock 50. That I find to be pretty interesting. Now, it's not entirely crazy. I mean, they were already paid, so to ask somebody who already paid to perform at Watkins Glen to perform in Maryland for free is not totally crazy. But I think Greg Peck said something interesting, which is that in the last week, some great artists came aboard to support Woodstock 50. So apparently they had been adding to their lineup, which I find pretty interesting because we did not know that prior to this moment. So I wonder who that is. I'm sure that's going to find its way out and leak over the next couple of hours and days. It's kind of, it warms my heart a little bit to hear that, because you have a festival that was so just rife with issues and bad permits and poor planning and just horrific organization. And you still had some people, supposedly, I mean, we're going to find out if that's real or not. I would assume it's real. You still had some people that were like, hey, I want to get on board for a good cause. Like, that warms my heart up a little bit. I know I'm an optimist. What a jerk. So I found that to be interesting. Michael Lang brought up radius clauses. That's pretty interesting. What a radius clause is, for those of you who don't know, if you play a certain area, like a Madison Square Garden or, whatever, any venue you play, a lot of the times that venue will say, well, you can't play within 90 miles of here within 6 months of now. That's a radius clause. You can't play in our area. So that's so that you can't book a show at Madison Square Garden and then go book a show at the Barclays Center. Now, some people who do that negotiate that right. We've seen that happen before. Obviously, there are exceptions. It's not always a hardcore thing. A lot of the times in the New York area here, metropolitan area, people come through and they play Jones Beach and they play, the one in Jersey that's not 90 miles away or whatever a radius clause would be. So those things are mostly acceptable, but those are usually within the same company. So that's the radius clause. So I find that interesting that there were some companies out there that were like, hey, no, you can't go play Woodstock 50 for free because you're playing our venue later on and we're trying to sell tickets here. So that's kind of interesting that was partially in the way to blocking this. I also find it interesting that Michael Lang is asking people to donate their money. That's kind of brazen a little bit, I guess. You ask me my personal feelings on this, and again, they're getting paid to do nothing. So to donate that money, I think that's a good thing. Some artists, that's going to be easier than others. Jay-Z's a billionaire. It's probably going to be easier for him to donate those fees than it is for, say, some of the other acts that were paid that are working bands that are trying to make ends meet and, grinding it out. A lot of those bands are, you go up and down that lineup and there's not a lot of billionaires and millionaires on that lineup. I believe most musicians are doing fairly well, but again, as the font size on the poster gets smaller, the pay is smaller. And a lot of those guys work really hard touring around the country for their money. So that's a little ballsy. That's a little ballsy if you ask me. Because again, like I said, just being in this industry for a little while, it looks like it's all glitz and glamour and a lot of money does get thrown around here. But, you do have some smaller acts that are starting out that you never know how long that gravy train is going to roll for, and ask them to donate a chunk of change. It's a nice thought. It's nice, but I don't know. Maybe the thing to do would be, and I hate to come off snippy here, would be to organize the festival the proper way and make sure you do everything right so that you can raise that money and not have to go and ask other people to donate it after you have to cancel it. That's just me. But again, what are they trying to do here? They're trying to do something nice. Did they fail horrifically at it? Yeah. But again, I feel like their intentions were all mostly good for the most part. And that is it. That's what I found to be pretty interesting. I mean, he mentions, partners and, bands and artists. So clearly they had some other financial backing here in the form of, usually partners means some sort of a sponsor. I do think that if they had their act together a little bit earlier, that they probably could have gotten this done. I do think that if they would have moved this to, New Era Stadium in Buffalo or Citi Field here in New York City earlier, I think they probably could have gotten this done. I think the Vernon Downs thing was a huge mistake. I think once you lose Watkins Glen, you got to kind of abandon the upstate thing there and just go for something just to make sure it works. Vernon Downs was a mistake. I really, really feel that was a mistake. I feel like they could have almost came through if they would have moved to one of those bigger venues that was built for big events a little bit earlier. They might have been able to do it then. I also do think it is classy of Michael Lang to point his attention towards the celebration going on up at Bethel. If you remember, and we've done some previous Morning Show with Anthony vlogs about this, we'll put a link to our whole playlist on Woodstock 50 as we've really followed this all the way through. They came out first. It was the Bethel people. It was Live Nation who came out and said this was going to be a Woodstock celebration, and we're going to do it on the original grounds up there in at Bethel Woods. And they wound up backing off of this eventually when Michael Lang made his intentions known that he was going to be doing something, and it was going to be over at Watkins Glen. And I will say, because again, we bring up radius clauses and all these things, I will say that these two entities got along pretty amicably throughout this whole entire process because Bethel Woods backed off the Woodstock name. They didn't call it a Woodstock thing. After that, they were still able to share a couple of artists, John Fogerty being one of them, which I thought was pretty interesting that they were able to do that and come to an agreement on that. Again, these are not things that really happen that are common in the music industry. For somebody to invoke a radius clause on an artist for a free event where they're trying to raise funds to get out the vote or climate change or whatever, it's a pretty hardcore business maneuver. It didn't seem like any of that was done throughout this entire process between Woodstock and the Bethel Woods people. So for Michael Lang, as he's dying on this hill, to be like, hey, we're gonna turn our thoughts towards Bethel, that's really cool. That's really, really cool. And if I'm going to continue to be an optimist, if people haven't shunned me on social media at this point, I think it would be awesome if some of those bands just hopped on board of the Bethel show. You know, a lot of them are already routed. That's what we kind of talked about would be some of the difficulty of getting down to, Maryland. If you're already routed, or if your next show is in Toronto or, New Hampshire or whatever, I don't know what all those artists were doing, what their schedules were, but if they're traveling by bus and their next gig was there and having to go all the way down to Maryland wasn't going to work for them, it wasn't going to work for them. Routing is important. Again, some of these artists, they're out there grinding. They're grinding. Not every artist is Jay-Z or Robert Plant and has millions upon millions in the bank. So they got to kind of stick to tour itineraries. And, to have to stay up in that sort of area, I think it would be cool now if you have that date open to shoot on over and do that. I wonder if they're going to do that. I wouldn't be surprised if some bands lend themselves to, being openers for Ringo or John or Santana. I think that would be kind of cool. I think that would be a nice way to honor the legacy of Woodstock. But again, they're not beholden to anything. I've seen some of the tour schedules of some of these artists. We just interviewed Taylor Goldsmith of Dawes. A lot of these guys a lot of them are on nice buses, but again, I've seen the grind. It's kind of rough. Sometimes when you get a day off on a tour, you kind of need that day off. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll keep our eye on it, but I think it would be cool if a couple of the artists were like, "Hey, Bethel, we'll add ourselves to the mix. We'll come on board and we'll perform and make a nice thing here." I think Bethel Woods is all non-for-profit, if I'm not mistaken. So that already kind of takes care of that aspect of things. But, maybe they put up some stuff and they're able to collect a little more for people that are going to that show. Again, that's a smaller venue than what Michael Lang was planning on having, Woodstock, the pavilion over there. But still, you can get some good done. You can still sort of honor the legacy by turning your attention and using some of the resources that you were going to put together behind Woodstock 50 and put it behind this Bethel Woods celebration. So we'll keep our eye on that. Thanks for checking out the morning show with Anthony Vlog. We'll catch you guys on the next one.